As soon as they had landed, the governor had Longwood informed that he would be there the next morning at 9 o'clock to see General Bonaparte. It was a time at which the emperor did not generally receive guests. Even if it had been otherwise, he was too hurt by this improper manner of announcing himself to receive him. The emperor told Count Monson, "He can come whenever he wants, but I will only receive him when he asks properly." The emperor was convinced for a moment that the admiral, with whom he was not on good terms, had not informed the new governor that in order to be presented, the request had to be addressed through the Grand Marshal, and that he had wanted to establish bad relations between Hudson Lowe and the emperor from the outset to make himself missed later on. "Certainly," he said to Dr. O'Meara, who was present. "He knows very well that I never receive at 9 o'clock. And if he wanted to talk to Lord St. Vincent or Lord Keith, he certainly would not have failed to inquire the time at which these gentlemen were able to receive him. I hope," said the emperor, laughing, "that I am as worthy as they are. It is lacking in generosity to add insult to misfortune." The doctor assured him that the governor had acted without wanting to hear the admiral's advice. "If you say so, I'm willing to admit his strong and loyal character. But nevertheless, he is a real shark. I have sought refuge among you, and I have found nothing here but poor treatment and insults. If the governor wishes to be presented to me, let him put in his request to Bertrand." As he left the emperor, Dr. O'Meara said to me, "I wish the shark could remain with us. Be certain that we will regret his departure." The doctor had gone into town, seen the governor's entourage, and learned that the instructions given him by his government were much more severe than those the admiral had put into effect until that time. On April 15th, at 9 o'clock sharp, Sir Hudson Lowe, followed by his staff, galloped into Longwood and dismounted at the door to the emperor's lodging, no doubt believing that at the sight of the jailer, the prison doors would open and reveal the prisoner to him. Orders had been given. Saint-Denis answered to the request made of him to see the general that the emperor was ill and had not yet risen. Lowe retreated and walked with long strides under the windows of the emperor, who saw him without being seen. He walked around the house and entered the duty officer's quarters to wait for the moment when he could be received. Obtaining no answer, he went in search of one. He was told the emperor was sleeping, and no one could enter to see him. The governor then went to see Count Bertrand and asked him to announce his arrival to General Bonaparte and ask when he would be willing to receive him. The weather was poor. There was a strong wind, and he was able to experience the Longwood climate. Sir Hudson Lowe's debut in his new government was not a fortunate one. The emperor chose the following day at 2 p.m. for the meeting. He had caught a glimpse of Sir Hudson Lowe through his shutters, but it was not enough to form an opinion about his person. He could not know the heart that beat beneath this outer shell. It was by talking to him that he proposed to judge him. The Grand Marshal told him he was a man 45 to 50, a little below average height, with graying hair and such bushy eyebrows overhanging his eyes that he had not been able to see the expression in his eyes. But he spoke with intelligence. He gave the emperor the newspapers brought by the phaeton and told him that he had received a letter from his father and that General Gourgaud had gotten one from his sister. The Russian, Austrian, and French commissioners who had been believed to be on board this ship were to arrive with the new admiral some 2 weeks later. The next day at 2 p.m., we saw Sir Hudson Lowe arrive, followed by his entire staff, and accompanied by Admiral Sir George Cockburn, who intended to present his successor to the emperor. They got off their horses and were led into the parlor. These gentlemen received them and waited for the moment when the Grand Marshal came to escort them in to be introduced. The emperor had been in the drawing room for 10 minutes, chatting with the Grand Marshal, when he was told of the governor and the admiral's presence in the parlor. At this point, there was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Novaraz was on duty at the door to the drawing room. When the emperor was receiving people, the practice was to allow only the person requested into the room where he was. The Grand Marshal opened the door slightly and said to Novaraz, "Have the governor come in." The admiral was at the other end of the room, talking with his back turned. He did not see Sir Hudson Lowe enter, and when he presented himself, Novaraz did not dare open the door again. saying to him that only the emperor had been requested, only the governor had been requested. The admiral, offended, went out to the saddle horses the grooms were watching, took his horse, and went back to town. Before leaving, Sir Hudson Lowe asked permission to introduce the officers on his staff. Having granted this, the emperor was surprised not to see the admiral, whom he knew had come with the governor, and asked that he be shown in. It was only then the emperor learned of Novaraz's mistake. He expressed his regrets for this and asked Dr. O'Meara to convey this to Sir George Cockburn. In addition, he sent one of his officers to clear up, if possible, the unpleasantness of such an involuntary lack of courtesy. Although he had cause to complain about the admiral, he used to say of him, "Under his uniform beats the heart of a soldier." When he went back into his quarters, accompanied by the Grand Marshal, the Emperor, speaking of Sir Hudson Lowe, said, "This man has a repulsive appearance and does not have an honest gaze. We must not rush to judge him, but I need to have his behavior reassure me about his physical appearance. His looks," said the Emperor, laughing, "remind me of a Sicilian thug. What do you think, Bertram?" The Grand Marshal replied he could not pass judgment, that perhaps he had only seen him through the prism of the qualities attributed to him, those of an honest man, a good administrator, a good father, and an undeniable intellect. The Emperor had remained worried, and Dr. O'Meara's words came back to my mind. "I wish the shark would remain with us. We shall regret his departure. Be sure of that." It would not be long before we understood the meaning of the doctor's words. Sir Hudson Lowe's acts from the time of his arrival on the island until the Emperor's death would be a series of outrages and useless vexations, proving the Emperor had judged him perfectly when he said of him, "This man is not only my jailer, he shall be my executioner." His first act on the island was the following communication, as inappropriate as it was insulting to the Emperor. Downing Street, 10th of January, 1816. "I must now inform you of the wishes of His Royal Highness the Prince Regent, which is that on your arrival in St. Helena you will inform all the persons in Napoleon Bonaparte's following, including domestic servants, that they are free to leave the island immediately to return to Europe, adding that no one will be allowed to remain in St. Helena except those who declare in a written statement to be deposited in your hands that it is their desire to remain on the island and submit to all the restrictions necessary to impose on Napoleon Bonaparte personally. Those among them who decide to return to Europe must be sent at the first favorable opportunity to the Cape of Good Hope. The governor of that colony shall be charged with providing them the means of returning to Europe. Signed, Bathurst." The Emperor, rightfully irritated by an offense that he said was intended for him, forbade anyone to sign anything. The Grand Marshal was sent to Plantation House to reply verbally to this communication and to agree on the wording of a statement, but he returned without having obtained anything. The Emperor dictated the following declaration to Count de Montauban. "We, the undersigned, wishing to remain in the service of the Emperor Napoleon, agree to remain here, no matter how horrible the stay in St. Helena, and to submit to the restrictions, no matter how unjust and arbitrary, that have been imposed on His Majesty and the personnel in his service." "Montauban," said the Emperor, "let those of my servants who wish to sign, but don't try to influence anyone." The statement was signed with joy by all of us who so deeply resented how insulting the British government's communication was to the Emperor. Hudson Lowe declared he refused any imperial qualification in the declarations. He wanted no other designation than that of Napoleon Bonaparte, under penalty of being sent to the Cape of Good Hope. There was no way of refusing to sign it in the form indicated. The governor did not limit himself to this. He sent Sir Thomas Reed, his chief of staff, to assure himself the solidarity we had given was truly the expression of our free will. He took care to repeat to us we were making a commitment not to leave the island until after the death of General Bonaparte. "Colonel," I said to him, "we all came here to share in the Emperor's misfortune, to serve him, and to lighten his chains as much as possible. What could these restrictions possibly mean to us? We are all here to live and die with him." "That is fine," he replied. "I will so inform His Excellency, the governor." We left, leaving him with the captain of the guard in whose quarters he had called us. Not satisfied with the report given him by his chief of staff, the governor, whose suspicion bordered on monomania, came himself to Longwood, had us appear before him, and returned fully convinced that our declaration to Sir Thomas Reed and that sent to him by Count de Montalon were truly the spontaneous expression of our attachment to the emperor and our full determination to share his captivity. These gentlemen also signed. It had to be done, or else they would have to leave the emperor. They did not hesitate a moment. The Grand Marshal tried to establish some conditions for his wife and children, but a few days later he signed as they had. During all this time, the emperor was deeply saddened. His great soul seemed to hesitate between the sacrifice he would have to make in letting these gentlemen leave and the complete isolation he would find himself in after their departure. So religious a devotion on the part of all, when he learned of it, eased the pain that had filled him. Such was the first act of Sir Hudson Lowe on his arrival in St. Helena. It was the prelude to the arsenal of restrictions to be established out of hatred for the emperor, and which he intended to put into practice, no matter how valueless they were. Until he moved to Longwood, the emperor had remained more or less indifferent to everything going on around him. He let matters run their course and seemed to notice very little the deprivations surrounding him. At the Briars, however, he had strongly resented the harassment inflicted on his officers, and he had suffered from not being able to remedy the situation. But once he was at Longwood, faced with the restrictions imposed on him, he rejected the outrages and the persecutions, his soul full of indignation, and behind this moral barrier he had imposed on himself, he demonstrated what a great man is like in adversity. From that moment on, it can be said that Napoleon's martyrdom began, and that St. Helena was to become his Calvary. The hatred on the part of the ministry shall be a stain on British honor forever. The emperor had resumed his work with these gentlemen, and his trips on horseback and by carriage with the ladies, only distractions he had to fill those long, dreary days. If during one of these outings he met people he knew from the town or the regiment, he would invite them for dinner and set a specific day. The state of affairs for a man as suspicious as Sir Hudson Lowe could not endure for long. For him, the security of the detention was compromised by each of these invitations and by each of the conversations between the emperor and the people he encountered during his outings. If the emperor had not been seen during the day by the duty officer, he would come at once to Longwood, to the Grand Marshals, declaring his instructions included witnessing the presence of General Bonaparte every day. Then, wanting to make all communications more difficult, he sent his aide, Mr. Gurricaire, to the tradesmen in town, informing them they were not to grant any credit to the French. They could not sell them anything unless they paid in cash, nor have any communication with them without the governor's permission. This prescription was official and posted throughout the town. The officers of the 53rd Regiment had gotten into the habit of going to Hut's Gate to see Countess Bertrand. They continued that practice when she lived inside the Longwood grounds, but they came to tell her that men of honor could not accept the conditions imposed on them to come and see her. Fear seized the inhabitants, and those who formerly, when they met us on the road, stopped to inquire about the emperor, now did so only as they walked by, because if they struck up a conversation, they were threatened with being forced to leave the island. The governor, whom the emperor had not seen since his first visit, came to Longwood and requested the honor of being shown in. The emperor had someone reply that he was ill and could not receive him, but 15 minutes later he climbed into his carriage with the ladies, so that the Lowe would clearly understand he had not wanted to see him. Another time, as he was about to get in his carriage, he spotted Hudson Lowe arriving at Longwood. He went back inside and did not come out again. He sent me to get a copy of Paul et Virginie and asked me to read it to him. The emperor felt this novel contained the language of the soul and had it read to him in whole or in part several times. The arrival of the Adamant on May 7th provided another opportunity for the governor to come to Longwood. and request to be received by the emperor in order to inform him, he said, of dispatches from his government. From any other man, one would have thought, from his urgency in communicating the information, that he was bringing his prisoners some news likely to ease the hardship of his captivity. But coming from Sir Hudson Lowe, one could expect quite the contrary. And the emperor hesitated to grant him an audience, but finally did so. The conversation that followed was long and animated. The emperor listed all the complaints he had against him during the month he had been on the island. They parted more angry with each other than ever. Dr. O'Meara reported to the emperor that as he went out, the governor had said to him, General Bonaparte is not satisfied, it appears, to have created for himself an imaginary France and an imaginary Poland, as the Abbé de Prat says, but he now wants to create an imaginary St. Helena here. I told the emperor that when leaving this discussion, the governor had inspected the moat he had dug around the property, and noticing in one corner a tree on the bank whose branches crossed the ditch, he had given orders that it be cut down, believing it could be used to jump across to the other side. The reason I said to him seems all the more ridiculous, as there isn't one of us who doesn't cross his ditch to go in or out of Longwood, and this means destroying a tree where there are so few of them. He came, said the emperor to Dr. O'Meara, to talk to me about a house sent by his government, about which the newspapers give me many details. He asked me where I wished it to be located, and I replied, I want nothing from you. I ask only one thing, and that is that you leave me alone. You tell me your instructions are more severe than those given to the admiral. Well, have the courage to put them in effect. I expect anything from your ministers. As for threatening to beat down my door to allow your aide to come in, I tell you he shall come in only over my body. The obligation of being accompanied by one of your officers is a vexatious measure. It is neither the man nor the uniform that bothers me. Poppleton is a good soldier whom I esteem, but I do not wish by any of my actions to give you the right to recognize that I am your prisoner. You know very well that the only surveillance needed to keep me here is that provided by your cruisers, and that to place an officer galloping behind me is absurd. But what you do not appear to know is that you are covering your name with shame, and that your children will be ashamed to carry it. The doctor told the emperor that officers from the Adamant, whom he had seen in town, had told him that public opinion in England had been quite moved on learning that the driest part of the island had been given to him as a residence, and that they had housed him in shacks when he could have lodged at Plantation House seemed inhuman. You may be certain, the emperor had replied, that the announcement of a wooden palace, of which today's newspapers give details, that are so many lies, is only placed here to fool people and let them believe my next home will have all the facilities and luxuries worthy of a lord. Having dismissed the doctor, the emperor went into the drawing room. He intended to go out in his carriage, but the wind was blowing quite forcefully, and he remained on the veranda, amusing himself by watching maneuvers in camp. The Adamant contained not a wooden palace whose construction was going to proceed by enchantment, according to the British papers, but lumber, stones, and furnishings, some of which were sent to Longwood, either to equip the rooms lacking them or to replace a few pieces no longer usable. Thus the parlor received a table, a few chairs, and a mahogany billiard table. The emperor did not play billiards, but when walking by, he would amuse himself by rolling the balls around. The furniture in the drawing room was changed. A carpet to hide the floor, a chandelier for the ceiling, and a large mirror placed above the chimney. 2 settees, 6 chairs, and 6 armchairs in black wood with gilt bronze ornaments on a dark green velvet background were sent. A table with a marble top was placed opposite the fireplace between the 2 windows, which received colored valances and curtains. A large mahogany table and chairs came to furnish the dining room. 3 mahogany library cases on stands were sent. The upper part of the doors containing gilt grillwork with green curtains to hide the shelves. These were put up in the room previously occupied by Count and Countess de Montauban. A large wooden table already there was topped with a green cover, and the large map of Italy made by Baron d'Alba was spread out over it. A few mahogany chairs completed the furnishings. The supervision of the library was entrusted to Saint-Denis. The emperor allowed us to replace a wobbly table he had in his room with a dresser that was sent which he felt he needed. A side table replaced the one he had. Its legs were in bad shape, and everyone feared that sooner or later the lunch served to him would fall to the floor when he leaned on the table while getting up. I asked for a mahogany armoire that I placed in a room to store all of the emperor's linen and free some space in the ones I had built. The furniture that had been replaced was distributed among the various lodgings occupied by these gentlemen, who may not have had these things. The passage of the East India Company fleet at St. Helena is marked each year by festivities. A great number of passengers on board these ships, the officers and the crew, come ashore to spend much money purchasing vegetables and poultry that the inhabitants always sell at the highest possible prices. It was also a good time for shopping. Dr. Mira, at the emperor's request, purchased a very fine ivory chess set for them. Among the people of distinction on board was Lady Moira, wife of the Governor-General of India. She was to stay on the island for 2 days at Plantation House, and undoubtedly expressed her desire to see or to be introduced to the emperor. The Grand Marshal came one morning to see the emperor with a letter from Sir Hudson Lowe that an orderly had just brought him, in which he invited General Bonaparte to come and have dinner with Lady Moira the following day. The strangeness of this invitation first had the emperor laughing. Then he said to the Grand Marshal, "But in truth, this man has no common sense whatsoever. It is one more insult to be recorded. Do not answer it. If were this lady sick, I might yield to her wish by going to see her. He knows perfectly well that as I must be followed by an officer, I shall not accept the invitation. Thus he prevents this lady from coming here and making herself a comparison between his luxurious residence and my miserable lodging. Lady Moira is free. Why doesn't she come and visit your wife and Montallon's?" In the hope of being introduced to the emperor, a considerable number of passengers came to see the Grand Marshal. The emperor was outside at that moment, and he chatted for a long time with one or the other. In dismissing them, he said to one of Lord Moira's ADCs, "Tell Lady Moira that had she been within the confines of Longwood, I would have paid my respects to her." That day before, among the visitors had been an officer who was a relative of Lord St. Vincent. He asked him to assure him the admiral was one of the men for whom he had the highest esteem. General Bingham had come to Longwood, and the emperor was hesitant to receive him. Then he decided to do so, as he had not seen him since he was promoted to the rank of general and wanted to congratulate him. When he was announced, it was at a moment when the soul is filled with disgust for men and things, as a result of reading a document Sir Hudson Lowe had sent to Longwood entitled Agreement, signed in Paris on August 2nd, 1815, by England, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Better than the sovereigns of those powers, the emperor foresaw the enormous mistake they had made by unifying against him to overthrow him. As a natural mediator between kings and peoples, he could avoid bloody upheavals and arrange the social reorganization of Europe without difficulties. They did not understand this. Such a concept was too far above these sovereigns' geniuses. They believed they were strong enough to suppress the revolutionary ideas that would swallow them up someday, and decided on the monstrous deed of having Napoleon transported to the Rock of St. Helena. Here is the agreement. Napoleon Bonaparte, being in the power of the allied sovereigns, their majesties, the King of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Ireland, the Emperor of Austria, the Emperor of Russia, and the King of Prussia, have decided, in accord with the stipulations of the treaty dated March 25th, 1815, on the most appropriate measures to make it impossible for him to attempt any enterprise against peace in Europe. Article 1. Napoleon Bonaparte is considered by the powers having signed the treaty of March 26th last to be their prisoner. Article 2. His guard is specifically entrusted to the British government. The choice of the place and the measures that can best assure the purpose of the present stipulation are left to His British Majesty. Article 3. The imperial courts of Austria and Russia and the royal court of Prussia shall name commissioners to proceed to and live in the place of the British government assigns as Napoleon Bonaparte's residence without being responsible for his security and will ensure that he remains there. Article 4. His Most Christian Majesty is invited, in the name of the four courts mentioned above, to send a French commissioner to Napoleon Bonaparte's place of detention. Article 5. His Majesty, the King of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Ireland, hereby undertakes to fulfill the commitments assigned to him by the present agreement. Article 6. The present agreement shall be ratified, and the ratification shall be exchanged within a few days, or sooner if possible. In witness thereof, the plenipotentiaries have signed the present agreement and have affixed their seals. Executed in Paris on August 2nd, 1815. Signed, Prince Metternich, Count Nasseretta, Lord Aberdeen, and Prince Hardenberg. Certified copy, signed Lieutenant General Sir Hudson Lowe, Governor of the Island of St. Helena, and Commissioner for His British Majesty.